Today I'm going to talk to you about building sentences. I think you probably know plenty about building sentences, and I'm quite sure that you write what are considered correct sentences already. But in order to really pop us up to the next level of really crafting sometimes complicated, thick, juicy sentences, it helps to go back to really the basics of what a sentence is. So every sentence breaks down to two basic elements. You have the subject, and the subject is what the sentence is about, or I like to think of it as the star of the sentence. So I know this is a dated reference, but if you think about Destiny's Child, that was a group with three singers, but Beyonce was the star, right? So in a sentence that is Destiny's Child, Beyonce is the subject. She's the star of the sentence. The predicate answers the question, what's the deal with the subject? So if I walked up to you and said, the bunny, you'd probably kind of look at me and wait for me to tell you what it is I want you to know about the bunny. In other words, you'd be thinking, well, Alexine, what's the deal with the bunny? And the answer to that question is the predicate. So a predicate could just be as simple as a verb, right? So the subject would be the bunny. What's the deal with the bunny? The bunny eats. So eats is the predicate. This is what we call a simple sentence. It just has a subject and a predicate. Well, it has the in there, but still, it's a simple sentence. You could also make the predicate a little longer. Subject is still the bunny, but I might say the bunny eats a carrot, right? Either way, I am telling you what the deal is with the bunny. So if you don't remember the word predicate, that's fine. But always remember that a sentence has a subject and it tells you something about the subject. And if you have those two things, you have written a complete sentence. I want to talk to you a little bit about the word carrot. The word carrot is what we call the direct object of the sentence. So you have a subject, the bunny, and in this case you have a direct object, which is what is being eaten by the bunny, okay? So let me show you what I mean here. I have a bunny, and I have a carrot, and the bunny's eating the carrot, right? So the bunny's the subject. The phrase licks the carrot is the predicate, right? As illustrated by this picture of this adorable bunny. Licks is the verb, you know this. And the carrot is the direct object, and it is what the bunny is licking. No, it shouldn't be lick. It should be eats. I don't know why I wrote lick, but I don't feel like redoing this video. So the bunny licks the carrot. We'll just stick with it. Okay. So the direct object is, in other words, what the bunny acts upon. And the way that I think of that is the direct object is what the subject verbs. What is the bunny eating or licking? The carrot, right? So it's what the subject, and then if I put the verb in there, it answers that question. So if I say the dog licks the ice cream cone, the dog is the subject of the sentence, licks is the verb. That could be a complete sentence. You could just say the dog licks and you'd have a complete sentence. But in this case, I want to tell you what the dog licks. In other words, what the dog verbs. What does the dog lick? The ice cream cone. So the ice cream cone is the direct object. You could also say, for example, they like salsa dancing. They is the subject, like is the verb, and the direct object is, two words, salsa dancing, right? So it's not that important to me that you memorize the phrase direct object, but what I do want you to see is that you can have multiple nouns. So in other words, dog is a noun and ice cream cone is a noun, but they're not both subjects. So a sentence can have a noun verbing another noun, okay? So I want to talk to you now about the basic idea of a complete sentence, okay? So like I said, a complete sentence could be something as simple as the bunny eats, right? It is a subject plus a predicate. And sometimes we call that an independent clause. A sentence fragment means a piece of something. So a sentence fragment is part of a sentence, but it's not enough to make a complete sentence. So if I said of a sentence, that would be a sentence fragment, right? Because it's not a complete sentence. I could even say part of a sentence, and it's still not a complete sentence, right? Because I need a subject and a predicate. I need to tell you what I'm talking about and what I'm telling you about what I'm talking about. So one kind of sentence fragment is something that we call a dependent clause, okay? So the way that I think about the difference between an independent clause, which is a complete sentence, and a dependent clause, which is a piece of a sentence, is I think about people. If I think about an independent person, I think about an adult who is able to pay their own bills, take care of themselves, get things done. Actually, to be honest, I think about Oprah Winfrey because Oprah Winfrey is surrounded by people, but Oprah Winfrey can get things done all by herself, right? She is an independent clause. I don't know if she's still with Stedman, but if she is, she's still an independent clause because she can stand on her own, right? When I think of a dependent, I think of a child, right? So sometimes you'll talk about how many dependents do you have, and they're talking about how many children you have. And we call them dependents because without an adult, without an independent clause, that child is not going to be able to survive. A child needs an adult, at least one adult, looking out for him or her, right? In the same way, a dependent clause needs an independent clause in order to be complete. I think of it like a child always holding the hand of an adult. A dependent clause should always be holding the hand of or attached to an independent clause, the adult. So a dependent clause is a very specific kind of sentence fragment. And it is started by specific kinds of words, which I'll tell you more about in the grammar book. For now, I'm going to show you one example. So if we look at this sentence, when they counted the votes, they knew Trump lost the election. This sentence has a dependent clause, which is when they counted the votes. That's not a complete sentence. And an independent clause, which is they knew Trump lost the election. This is a complete sentence. This is a complete sentence, right? They is the subject. What's the deal with they? They knew Trump lost the election. But if I look at this sentence, when they counted the votes, it's not a complete sentence yet. And I'll get back to that, okay? So hold on, because I want to show you one more cool thing. You can flip this kind of sentence. So you could start with the independent clause. They knew Trump lost the election, right? That's the same as here. They knew Trump lost the election. And then here's my dependent clause when they counted the votes, right? So you can write a sentence that begins with a dependent clause, when they counted the votes, and ends with an independent clause, they knew Trump lost the election. Or you can have a sentence that begins with an independent clause, they knew Trump lost the election, and ends with a dependent clause, when they counted the votes, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit more about the construction of a dependent clause in your grammar book. But for now, I just want to talk to you about how I think about dependent clauses. I think of them like cliffhangers, right? So, oops, I forgot to show this to you. Here's another example, sorry. If we don't succeed, we run the risk of failure. If we don't succeed is a dependent clause. We run the risk of failure is an independent clause. You could flip it. We run the risk of failure if we don't succeed. Okay, back to the cliffhanger. Cliffhangers refer to that. This guy is in a cliffhanger situation, right? And a cliffhanger creates the feeling of wanting to know what happens next, right? So if I'm reading a story or watching a movie or even just looking at an image and I see someone hanging like this, I want to know what happens next. And I took this from a business presentation about how to create what they're calling cliffhanger content. In other words, content that makes you want to know more in order to sell something, okay? But really the cliffhanger comes from, let me go back to that, a dependent clause creates this feeling. I said that already. It really comes from old TV shows, right? So here's an example of a cliffhanger. Here's our hero and he's lying with this rope tied to this board. And I guess we're supposed to understand that this is the blade that is going to cut him in half. And here are his compatriots and they're tied up. And then it says to be continued. So back in the old days when you couldn't binge watch, you would have to wait a whole week to find out what happens next. That's called a cliffhanger. That creates this feeling of wanting to know what's next. And that's what's created when we make a dependent clause. When they counted the votes. Can you feel how you want to know what happened next? That's how you know the sentence isn't complete. So the last thing I wanted to say was, Can you think of any current TV shows that use a cliffhanger? I'm currently watching a very sweet little reality series called Love on the Spectrum. And the third season, I'll admit, I've watched the first two already. The third season definitely has a cliffhanger because at the end of the first episode, this young woman goes on a blind date with a young man and announces to him, I'm in love with you. And he says, I need a minute. And he gets up and walks away. And she says to the people filming the show, did I just make a mistake? And then it ends. And I got to tell you, man, I binge watched that because I needed to know what happened next. I'm not going to tell you. But anyway, that's my question for you. Can you think of any current shows that end in a cliffhanger? If so, put one in the comment and I'll give you some bonus sprinkles for it. So that's it. I hope this helps you understand a little bit about sentence structure. Don't forget there's going to be a quiz on this. And if you have any questions, please bring them to class.